Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Luxury Investment Podcast. I am your host, Carter. Thank you so much for listening or watching. If you are watching on my YouTube channel, I video all of my episodes there if you are video inclined. Now, today's episode is coming as a request from my Instagram, which of course is @CurrentlyCarter if you don't follow me there. I have an amazing community that we chat all about luxury investments and how to make your closet into a portfolio. So this episode today comes from a request in my DMs to make a specific episode just for this subject. And that subject is investment jewelry. Is it worth it? What's the difference? What's costume jewelry versus fine jewelry? And then we're going to get into a bit of watches. What's an investment watch? What isn't? How to get an investment watch? What's the difference? Et cetera, et cetera. So let's jump right into it. What is an investment jewelry piece? To answer that question, we really have to define two categories: costume jewelry and fine jewelry. Most of the time when you're talking about fashion houses, they do have both. Let's take Chanel, for example. They have costume jewelry and then they have a fine jewelry department. Their fine jewelry is much less popular than their costume jewelry, and it's not available in as many boutiques, for example, but it does exist. Now, when you're talking about fine jewelry, you're talking about precious metals, all the different carats of gold, 24 karat gold, 18 karat gold, silver, and stones, precious stones, ruby, diamond, etc. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have costume jewelry or fashion jewelry, which is most of the time low-end metals that are coated with maybe a 24 karat gold, or they're coated with just a base metal in general. Chanel doesn't coat any of their jewelry anymore with 24 karat gold. Most of their vintage jewelry was coated in 24 karat gold. I actually have a piece of vintage Chanel earrings that I have on right now. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see those. These are coated in the 24 karat gold. Love Chanel vintage jewelry for that reason. So that's kind of in the middle. We'll call that in the middle. But for the most part, you have two different sides, right? Fine jewelry and fashion jewelry. Now, when you're talking about fashion jewelry or costume jewelry, that is a great investment because that will pretty much always hold its value because it's highly recognizable and it's on the lower end of the spectrum as far as an entry price point into Chanel. You can get a pair of Chanel earrings for, let's say, $600. Now, those have gone up in price every year, like many of the other Chanel items do. So that would be a great investment value because let's say you could get them for $600 right now. Well, in 2 years, more than likely, they're going to be maybe $800. And because they don't inherently get a lot of wear on them, like visible wear when you're wearing earrings, you're not getting a lot of scuffs, for example, or overall signs of wear like you might see on shoes, then you're going to be able to sell those same earrings for, let's say, maybe $650 or $700 if they're $800 in store, and especially if they're a recognizable design that maybe they don't do anymore. So in that category, that is a great investment because of those reasons. You have the fact that they don't get a lot of wear, they're iconic designs, and they go up in value every year in store in retail prices. And those are the three pinnacle points that you want in every investment piece. Now let's talk about the opposite, the fine jewelry. Now, fine jewelry inherently, obviously, is usually much more expensive, but I will tell you that it is probably one of the worst things you can invest in as far as long-term investment value, and I'll tell you why. Fine jewelry is an extremely high markup. The actual value of gold or the value of silver or the value of the stones very, very much depends on the source that it's coming from. And because lab-grown stones and diamonds have become so readily available and so close to the real thing, the real natural thing, I should say, it has very much affected the actual worth of fine jewelry. Now, when you're talking about fine jewelry that's associated with a brand, like let's say Chanel, again, the markup is very, very high because there's this perceived value that fine jewelry should be expensive based on the precious metals, that the materials are hard to get or take a long time to get, but in actual reality, that is no longer the case. It definitely used to be the case, and that is why this perceived value has lasted for so long. But now, since introducing lab-grown gems and the materials are just not that hard to find anymore compared to the scarcity and the difficulty that it took to manufacture gold in years past, that really isn't the reality anymore. And because of that, on the resale market or the secondary market, things are nowhere near worth as much as typically you would pay for it retail. So let's talk about it. Let's go back to Chanel and the fine jewelry collection. The fine jewelry collection inherently is not as popular as the costume jewelry collection. When you have something that isn't as popular or as well known mainstream, instantly that is going to affect the actual worth of the item on the secondary market. Even if the overall value of the item is higher, it doesn't actually matter as far as investment value and secondary market goes, because the worth on the secondary market is solely based on popularity of that item. So you might have, let's say, the cushion ring, and a good amount of people might know what the cushion ring is. It's a gorgeous ring. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a band and it has the diamond quilting in the band, and it's a part of the Chanel fine jewelry collection. It's probably one of their most popular pieces. That ring is gorgeous and it's amazing and it's so pretty, but do a lot of people know what that ring is? No. More people know what a Chanel CC earring is? Yes. And that's the difference, because you have way more buyers for a $500 pair of Chanel earrings than you do, a $1,200 ring that is less popularized. So you're really starting to buy fine jewelry because maybe you're trying to get your buying history up for some particular reason, because you're wanting to get offered more rare bags, or just you really like that piece and you want to wear it all the time. But it ends up being much more of a personal purchase than it does necessarily a luxury investment purchase. So you do want to take that into consideration when you're talking about building your portfolio, because that would be a depreciating asset. You're going to have a lot of wear on a ring, for example, on your hands. So of course it's going to be a lot less valuable in that case because it's used. And then on top of that, you have the fact that it's just not as popular. Another great example of this would be Cartier. Cartier is obviously an incredible jewelry brand that a lot of people know and love. And since jewelry is the only thing Cartier does, of course, aside from watches, you have much more identifiable pieces from their fine jewelry collections. Two of those, probably most popularized collections, would be the Just Un Clou collection and the Love collection. The Just Un Clou is the iconic nail. You see them a lot in bracelets, and they also have rings and earrings and a necklace and et cetera, et cetera. It's a full collection, of course. And the Love bracelet is the solid gold all the way around that has little circles with almost like a screw type head in between, and there's several of them all the way around on the bracelet. Both of those are very popular and they've been around for a really long time. So the investment value of those pieces would be a lot more than, say, the Chanel fine jewelry collection, just purely because of the popularity of them. Now, is it still a luxury investment? That's kind of in the maybe category, and I'll tell you why. Cartier has gone up in price every year. They do increase their prices. You can get a Just Un Clou bracelet for much less expensive 5 years ago than you can get it today, but it is on your wrist, or the rings are on your hands. They're gold pieces, right? They're solid gold. So it means you're going to get a lot of wear on them. They are going to ding, they're going to dent, because gold is soft, right? Especially 24 karat gold or even 18 karat gold, it's soft. So when you're using it on a day-to-day basis, especially the Love collection, the Love bracelet collection, you screw it on. So of course you're going to have a lot of wear. So now you're automatically selling something in a used condition, whereas maybe the earrings are not going to show as much signs of wear. So you're not going to have to disclose the fact that it is in very much a used conditions state. But like I said before, Cartier does go up in price every year. So that's why this is in the maybe category, because this is really about crunching your numbers. Whenever you bought it retail, how long have you held the jewelry piece, and what is the retail now? Is it realistic for you to sell a little bit over what you paid for it retail? Will it still being in that heavily used condition? If it's a bracelet that you haven't used a lot and it's in a size that fits a lot of different wrists, then that might be something that you might be able to get your full investment back out of. But overall, those numbers usually mean you're losing some of your investment. You're still going to get a lot of your investment back out of it, but overall, you're probably not going to make money like you could on something like costume jewelry. And again, that's something that is typically very personal. People buy jewelry because they want memories, they want a specific time in their life, or they want it from their husband or their significant other. And it's something that is more based on memories that they're going to wear every day, and less of a fashion piece that they can just hold in their closet and let it appreciate in value over time. So if you're talking about comparatively, as far as the rankings of luxury investments, jewelry is not high on the list, but not impossible. Next, let's talk about watches. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about investment watches and the fact that watches can go for, $100,000 on the secondary market and above. Let's talk about it. I'm a bit of a watch buff. I mean, I'm kind of in a novice category, but I know enough about it to explain the luxury investment value. What is a luxury investment value and what is not? There's a lot of debate on this subject on the internet, so let's get into it. I think watch collectors really kind of go into three different categories. You have true collectors, you have novice collectors, and you have hype collectors. So the true collectors is a category that I would talk about someone that is interested in the timepiece, meaning the actual complication of the actual movement of the watch. The manufacturing machinery of a watch really dictates how complicated a watch can be. Then you have different categories of those complications. You have the chronograph, you have tool watches, you have hand wound versus automatic, and the list goes on. And this is really the category where you can very much geek out on all the different types of movements and how complicated and how the dial looks and the dial compared to the movement, et cetera, et cetera. Next category, you have the novice collector. Now, the novice collector, in my definition, is somebody that wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of money on a particularly special movement, but understands it and thinks it's pretty, but really buys watches for the aesthetic, what they like, what they think looks good, but at the same time, keeping in mind brands that might retain their value over other brands, whereas the difference being from the true collector, which buys a watch purely based on the movement and not necessarily the brand popularity. There are a lot of watch brands that are very popular in the true collector category because the movement is very complicated, but for the mass public, they could not tell the difference between that watch and just an average Joe watch. There isn't a lot of difference on the outside, but to a true collector's eyes, there's a huge difference. The novice collector isn't going to buy into a watch that the mass majority doesn't recognize, but they would be able to tell the difference maybe themselves. I fall into the novice category. I really enjoy watches. I enjoy the movement, but am I going to spend a lot of money on a watch that isn't recognizable? Probably not. I'm much more into the aesthetic, buying things that are vintage, appreciating the vintage watches, appreciating the pretty watches, even more in the jewelry category of watches, et cetera, et cetera. Next, we have the hype collector. The hype collector buys watches based on the investment value, but this is where we get into a very big debate on the internet because in order to obtain a hype watch or a very collectible watch, you need to go on a list with a jeweler or an authorized retailer. That is how, let's say, for example, Rolex sells their watches. You cannot go into a Rolex boutique. You have to go into a authorized retailer of a high-class watch. You have kind of the holy trinity or the top three watch brands, which are Patek Philippe, AP, which is Artemis Piguet, or Rolex. Now, Rolex obviously is the most popular of those three as far as overall brand awareness or mass public recognition. And because of that, of course, you have the best investment value of the three. And as we know, notoriety is king on the secondary market. The more something is well known by the mass public, the more money it's going to sell for on the secondary market, hands down, every time. Now, this is where the big debate comes in because the most quote unquote investment Rolex watches are their tool watches. So we're talking about the Submariner, the Sea Dweller, the Daytona, the Explorer, the list goes on. Those are tool watches because originally they were created or advertised to be a tool for a category. So you have the Sea Dweller, for example, that's meant to be a diver's watch. It can be submerged under many meters of water, or the Master, which of course is an aviation watch meant for pilots. And because they got so popularized, they all have nicknames. So you have the red and the blue, that's nicknamed the Pepsi. You have the blue and black, that's nicknamed the Batman. You have the green, that's nicknamed the Hulk. The list goes on. There's many different nicknames, but usually all based on the colors of the dial. Okay, so we have which ones are popular and why, but how do you get those watches and how are they an investment? Well, This is why a lot of people argue popular watches are not actually investment pieces. Because you have to go to an authorized dealer in order to get a watch at the retail value, you have to already have a very good relationship with that authorized dealer, because that authorized dealer is only allotted so many of those watches. And of course, there is a very long list to get a Rolex at retail price. So if you're a very good client of theirs, you buy lots of other things from them, then you're going to get that spot whenever they get allotted a watch. But because you've already spent a lot of money with that authorized retailer to even realistically get on that list, and if you were to buy that watch and then sell it the next day for triple the cost, you're never going to get offered another watch from that authorized retailer. Reselling is very taboo, especially in that world. So the argument is, if you can't regularly resell it under any circumstances, then it's not actually an investment piece. I would argue that it is still an investment piece because it holds its value. And that's really what we define an asset as, something that maintains its value over time. So that $30,000 Rolex tool watch is always going to be worth $30,000 down the line. Now, whether it goes up massively in value to, $60,000 or not, it doesn't really matter, because it is still maintaining its original value. Whereas buying something else, another good, is going to decrease in value the second you purchase it and wear it. So from that aspect, I think it definitely still is an asset, because you can always sell it for what you bought it for. And the same goes for AP and Patek. AP and Patek are a little less well known to the masses, but still very much considered a luxury asset or a collector's item, because they are also very, very hard to come by. They both have implemented scarcity in their marketing strategies, so they're just very hard to get, and you have to usually have spent a lot of money with the particular retailer in order to get offered, and that is why they're so popular. Now, fashion watches are pretty much never going to turn a true collector's head. True collectors are only interested, like I said before, in the movement of a watch, the history of the manufacturer. So brands like Brand Seiko or movements like Chronograph, those are the things that a true collector is looking for. Now, the novice category and maybe even the hype category are your buyers of fashion watches. Fashion watches are from brands like Cartier, Chopard, Bulgari, the list goes on. Now, Cartier is really in a category of its own, because Cartier has a lot of history with their watches. You, of course, have the tank watch that was designed during the war. When you look from the top down at a war tank, it is the same design as the watch. Then you have Cartier Panthère watch, which is also incredibly iconic. Really, we're talking about dress watches, pretty watches you would wear out. Rolex also has a line for this, and it is called Cellini. Cellini is really a bit of the redheaded stepchild to Rolex. You have the true collectors that don't get it. It is very different. It has lived many different lives over the years, but Cellini is the dress watch category for Rolex. There are some gorgeous Cellini watches that I think, again, really cater to the novice collector, because they're going for the aesthetic and the fact that it's a well-known brand like Rolex. But as far as the complication goes of the actual movement, that's usually not there. Cellini is made to be a dress watch, to be very pretty, but they really haven't found their feet for quite a while. There has been a lot of different lives and a lot of different variations of the Cellini line within Rolex. I own a Cellini. I love it. I think it is gorgeous, but to find one similar to mine is actually kind of few and far between. Now, the newer Cellini watches are gorgeous. I highly recommend you check those out, but buying one retail now would actually not be a very good luxury investment, because it has lived so many different lives throughout the years. There's not a lot of buyers of the Cellini line in Rolex. Much more popularized is, of course, the tool line, like we talked about. So the only time it would really be a luxury investment is if you're buying a vintage Cellini in a design that was popular enough to last the test of time. The newer watches, I think, start around $20,000, and you're not going to get that much out of a Cellini watch on the secondary market if you're wanting to coop back your initial investment anytime soon. So in this fashion watch category, again, I think it really comes down to the numbers and specifically what you're talking about. If we're talking about a Cartier Panthère, it has been around a very long time. It is very popular. If you find a good deal on a vintage one, absolutely that's going to hold its value long term, because it fits within those three rules. It has the history, it has mass recognition, and it doesn't have a lot of wear. Of course, you're going to want to take care of your watch piece, but it can be restored and sold for much more. Again, again, something like shoes isn't going to be as easy to restore, so it does still fit within that category. If you're buying one brand new on the market right now, are you going to get all of your money back out of it, let's say in the next 5 years? I don't know. You're really going to want to have to crunch those numbers, because as Cartier does go up in value every year, is it going to go up in value that much where someone would be willing to risk that much money on the secondary market, when more than likely they're buying this piece to be a memory of a specific time in their lives or from someone special? So they do enjoy the experience of going into the boutique and having that memory specifically. Now, I do have a bit of a fun tip for you. This wouldn't be the Luxury Investment Podcast if I didn't bring you a good deal or good information to note. There is a watch that is recognized by all three of these categories as being very expensive, but it isn't. It is the anomaly of all of the watches. And because it's the anomaly, it even has the respect of the true collector. And that watch is the Seagull 1963. I'll put a picture here if you're watching on YouTube. It is a chronograph. Now, chronographs are the stopwatches. Usually they have 3 different watches behind the dial. Chronographs inherently are very expensive because it is a very complicated movement. But interestingly enough, the Seagull 1963 manufacturing equipment was actually bought from a Swiss manufacturer from China. Originally, the Swiss manufacturer was trying to branch out into another category of watches, and they needed an influx of money. So they sold their machines to the highest bidder, which was China, and China made the Seagull 1963 as their military watch. So it has the history there for the true collectors. It has the look of being a very expensive watch for the novice and the luxe collector, and overall, it's a very cool watch. It has a skeleton back so you can watch all the movement of the chronograph happen, and it is just very aesthetically pleasing. It is around $350 for that chronograph watch, which is insane because typically a chronograph from any other brand will start at the several $1,000 mark. So like I said, it's a bit of an anomaly and a bit of a fun deal for you. If you want to get into watch collecting, that is a great start. And there you have it, guys. The full rundown of jewelry versus watches. Please let me know if you have any questions over on my Instagram. I didn't want to go into too much more detail because this would be way too long of an episode, but I love this subject and I would love to hear more about what you are interested in me talking about in future episodes. So please let me know over there at Currently Carter, and I will see you in the next episode.